Hello, everyone, and welcome. So, I've started a new series as a result of my own kind of burrowing into different rabbit holes. The first rabbit hole that I came about discovering was the rabbit hole around different celebrities and what has happened with their life, whatever happened to. I've got caught up in that, which ended up being feeling stupid, but at the same time ended up inspiring me to kind of get these charts of these celebrities and to kind of figure out why some of these twists and turns in their lives had happened that way. Of course, we are under siege by this motherfucker here, and so I thought he might be the first person to kind of look at individually. And I thought what I would do is I'd pick something out about each person and then kind of go into that in detail. And so today we're talking about Donald Trump, Agent of Destruction, Mars, Hate, Tyranny, and Holy War. Really, the actual title is Donald Trump and the Astrology of Mars, but the Agent of Destruction works for this. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do first is I'd like to share one or two clips that kind of put my point, kind of confirm my point about this. First of all, obviously, we know that since he became president, he has what he bombed Venezuela and kidnapped Maduro. He has now, of course, started this war with Iran, and I just these clips. One of the clips is going to. These are really short, but one of the clips is going to kind of show what's kind of happening, and then we're going to go to the chart. And we're going to kind of see how it all kind of comes together. Okay, so this first clip, Trump basically, basically talks about how he's just going to have to, some of you are going to have to die, and that's just a sacrifice he's willing to do with. Right. Okay. So he's ready to sacrifice Americans for his war. But this person, Ask Rafaela, talks about basically the religious implications that have started as a result, or rather that have developed as a result of starting this. Okay, so that gives us quite a bit of context about what I'm talking about here. First of all, the laissez-faire attitude about going into war, and then secondly, the as a result of this laissez-faire attitude, the and maybe of course as a result of wanting to avoid the implications of this relationship. Now all of a sudden, the United States has found itself possibly in the middle, not possibly, but very likely in the middle of a holy war that, I mean, we haven't experienced holy wars like this since possibly the Reformation. But think the Crusades and remember how many of them there were and remember how successful they ultimately were. Almost not at all. There were four Crusades and they were almost not at all successful ultimately. So let's look at this motherfucker because he really encapsulates so many aspects around this issue of Mars, and it's really important. So, first of all, note that the ascendant is 29 degrees and 55 minutes of Leo. that is within maybe 30 minutes or 15 or 16 minutes of the fixed star Regulus. And that's something that we really have to take into account with this chart is that fixed stars, especially royal fixed stars of the first magnitude, like Regulus, they have a tendency to protect. Not just elevate, but to protect. And if I'm not mistaken, the fixed star Regulus is of the nature of Saturn and Mars. So here we have Mars on, within 3 degrees of Regulus. Now, I talked earlier about how when we looked at the 146 considerations, and I have a whole series of videos about the Benatti 146 considerations, which I think are really foundational to what we're doing here. Um, when I looked at that, they talked about this thing called the hidden helper, the strong hidden helper. And of course, the ascendant is right on it. It's probably within 50 minutes, or like I said, 15 minutes. So the strong hidden helper in a chart is when a planet is in its own sign and really well dignified and on a fixed star that reflects its nature. Now, Mars just happens to be relatively well dignified in this chart, even though he's not in a sign that he rules. The which we would call a domicile, right? So the domiciles of Mars are Aries and Scorpio, and so he's not in his domicile here. He's not, nor is he in his exaltation, which is Capricorn. But just to go for a moment, so we can see here we come forward, excuse me, if we come forward, we can see here that this is called the essential dignity chart. And for every single degree of the zodiac, there are potentially 5 planets who have diminishing rulership over that degree. So for instance, 30 degrees of Leo is what we were just talking about, right? So here's the sign of Leo. So, domicile, of course, of Leo is Sun, or rather, the domicile of Leo Sun is the Leo, right? The domicile of Leo Sun is Leo, right? Then also, exaltation. There is no planet that is exalted in Leo. There are 3 planets that rule each element, and one it takes precedence by day, and one takes precedent by night. Those are called triplicity lords, and so the triplicity lords are Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. And so it is daytime in this chart, so that means that the Sun now has 5 points. Note that each particular classification has an amount of points, and they decrease, right? So domicile starts at 5, exaltation goes to 4, Mars is, so we're looking at Leo, right? Nobody is exalted in Leo. Let's look at Aries for a second. So we know that Mars rules Aries, so that's his domicile. We know that the Sun is exalted in Aries, so he would get 4 points. We know that the Sun and Jupiter and Saturn all are the triplicity lords of Aries. We know that then we come to this thing called terms, which are 5 unequal parts of the zodiac, divisions of the zodiac, each of which are ruled by the 5 wandering stars, not the sun or the moon. And then what you all know as decans are called face. And so for every 10 degrees, there's a different planet that rules that, right? So domicile 5, exaltation 4, triplicity 3, terms 2, decan 1. Okay, got that? So the planets that we're looking for 30 degrees of Leo, Sun, because it's daytime, Mars, and Mars. So, which brings me back to my point, which Mars has 3 points. Mars is not weak in this chart, or not particularly weak, or not peregrine, right? Which is when a planet is in a sign in which it has no dignity. For instance, this Jupiter. Well, no, technically not this Jupiter. Moon. The moon is completely peregrine. She has no dignity at all in Sagittarius. Unless she turns out to be the face ruler in this particular degree, she will have no dignity at all. Same thing with the sun, but we found that in this particular degree, the sun is the face ruler. So that's basically what I'm talking about. And all of these things matter. These things matter because the good or bad of a planet emanates from the house. Wait. The good or bad of a house emanates from the condition of its planetary ruler. The good or bad of a house emanates from the condition of its planetary ruler. So that means, and also remember, every planet has its own significations, thus meaning that whatever, for instance, look here at the Saturn, right? So Saturn, one of the things that's connected to Saturn is discipline, right? Is discipline. So Saturn in Aquarius and Capricorn would be relatively would have relatively strong discipline. They would have a good sense of their limitations. They would be disciplined. They would slow down and do the things that were necessary. But now look here, Saturn in Cancer is the detriment of Saturn. So one of the things that this person might not have is much discipline, right? So that's just a great way of kind of looking at not just how, and also Saturn in Cancer, in his detriment, also rules the seventh house of marriage and the sixth house of illnesses. We're seeing things about illnesses. Saturn rules the skin. We're seeing things with illness with his skin right now. We're seeing also that there have been problems and issues with marriage. He's been married 3 times. One of his wives accused him of rape. I think Ivana is the one who accused him of rape. There's another one about what's her name? I forget the second wife. Another one whose name starts with M. But she was at a party and there was a 14-year-old girl there, and she said, "Make sure that she doesn't get anywhere near my husband," right? And then we know, and we've been hearing for years, that Melania can't stand the look of him. She fucking hates his guts. So anyway, right? So so that gives us a very good example of why, and also, of course, I have a video that talks about planetary strength and why it matters. So we just got a little bird's eye view of planetary strength and why it matters. The good or bad of a house emanates from the condition of its ruler. Condition of its ruler. Okay, so that means that the houses, the fourth house and the ninth house for Mars, can work. They can be really useful for this person. And so one of the perfect examples of that is, how did he make most of his money, or what is he known for being going to business in? Real estate. Fourth house represents buildings and homes, anything above and underneath the ground. Right. So already we've got that. And if you go back and we look at Making a Billionaire, the Creating of a Billionaire video that I did, we talked about how the significator for substance in this chart is Mars, and that it made much more sense than using anybody else, mostly because we saw it reflected in the life. This is how the person is mostly making money. Then, what I hadn't seen prior to this, or what I hadn't really been looking at strongly enough, is the ninth house aspect. I never understood fully the ninth house aspect. Now, understand that the ninth house in Vedic astrology is one of the most auspicious houses in the chart. It's more auspicious than what they call the Kendras or some of the angles. Like, it's really considered the highest, the one of highest good fortune. Kind of like in our medieval period, it's the 11th house that's really kind of the highest good fortune that can come to you. Of course, the fifth house is called good fortune, right? But the 11th house, partially because of the way that the celestial movement is going to move whatever is in the 11th to the 10th, it represents that really exciting ascent to the peak of the mountain, to the mountain peak, to the mountaintop. And so, it's that one of our favorite things to, when we read biographies of famous people, at least for me, finding out how it happened, how the ascent took place. That's going from the 11th to the 10th. So that's the difference, kind of. But I've always wondered, and even like Hellenistic astrology, in Hellenistic astrology, this was called king. The ninth house was called king, and the third house was called queen. So it's only in the medieval period that these ideas of kingdom moved from the ninth house to the 10th. And if I'm not mistaken, the throne is in the fourth house, and the crown is in the 10th, and the throne is in the fourth, or something like that. Anyway, but some kind of thing like that that's in the Vedic astrology. But I think we also have in mundane. I think we also have something similar. Let me know if I'm mistaken. But let's come back to Mars, because I really want to kind of go back into, or the significations of Mars. What do we talk about? Blood, violence, division, as opposed to harmony. So Venus represents harmony. one of the main things that Trump has done since has become president is he has divided the populace. He has created a contentious civil society. Actually, as a matter of fact, the civil aspect of society is actually being further and further diminished. It's being further and further eroded. So the civility, right? Civility in a lot of ways can be attributed, in my opinion, to Saturn in Libra. Remember that Libra is the exaltation of Saturn, right? But there's the way that Venus does Saturn, and then there's the way that Libra does Saturn. And I think the way that Libra does Saturn is etiquette, manners, and civility. Note here Note here that Mars is in Leo, which is the other detriment of Saturn. This is something new for me, kind of in a way. Basically, looking at relationships between planets and how they might, because we're not using Chiron, we're not using. We've got all those parts and everything. We're not really even using the outers all that much, right? But what we do have is we have how these, even though planets may or may not be in any kind of may or may not be in any kind of relationship as far as aspect is concerned, we can make automatic kind of conclusions, knowing that, okay, this Mars is going to be antithetical to whatever Saturn does, right? It's not that at some point they won't be able to, things won't work for them, but we know pretty much that and this is on the ascendant, so this is on the person's mind. Remember, the first house represents the head and the body. So Mars is on the mind, and not just Mars, but Mars and Leo. Mars is already a hot and dry sign. Mars is already a hot and dry planet. Leo is a hot and dry sign, right? Hot and dry sign. So that means that Mars is in a sign of its own nature, so it can burn things down. Right? One of the things that people have always said about Trump is everything he touches, he destroys. He destroys everything he touches. Right? Destruction is Mars. Only after these outers kind of came out did we stop really attributing some of the important things from Mars. For instance, something like instability or descent, right? We might give those things to Uranus now or something like that. But understand that religious descent in the medieval period was ruled by Mars, and so was pilgrimage. So was pilgrimage. Because pilgrimage represented an arduous journey on which you might be attacked. It was a danger. It was danger. Remember, during the Crusades, right? We're talking about this whole thing. During the Crusades, that's how the Knights Templar and the John's his Hospitallers or something. That's how these knights that would basically they would basically, what's the word I'm looking for? They would accompany pilgrims so that they wouldn't be attacked. And so, in India, my God, some of these great pilgrim spots are eh, high up on mountains. There's a 14-kilometer walk to Kedarnath. You get to the town, and the only way to get there is to either walk or take a burro or a horse or something like that. 14 kilometers up into the Himalayas. And so, what is it? Historically, a lot of these pilgrimage spots have been very difficult to get to, have represented extremely arduous journeys, and anything could happen. So there's Mars as the ruler of really long distance journeys and pilgrimages. Anyway, so I digress, but I don't digress because remember, one of the things that I mentioned is holy wars. And I want to come back to Regulus because Regulus, first of all, understand that Leo, we all know that zodiac signs rule certain locations. They rule like geographical locations, like cities and towns and countries. And one of the things that Leo rules is Italy and Rome, especially Rome. And of course, think of Regulus. Right, Regulus used to be called the heart of the lion because it was probably around 15 degrees of. I guess when they named it, it might have been somewhere around 15 degrees of Leo, right? So it was called the heart of the lion. It's now in Virgo, but lions, regnum, Ray, king. Lion is the king of the jungle. So there's always been this symbolism around royalty. Matter of fact, the royal signs of the zodiac are Leo and Cancer because the sun and the moon are the king and queen of heaven. Excuse me. Thus, we've got this royal sense of, we've got this royal star. We've got this royal star that is helping Mars, that is basically elevating Mars. There it is. Royal star that is elevating Mars, that elevates Mars, this Mars that's extremely arrogant. Remember, because Leo is ruled by the sun, which rules arrogance and pride. So we should have a maybe somewhat violent, belligerent, arrogant, prideful person, right? Prideful person, right? Because it's right on the head. It's right on the on the ascendant. Anything on the ascendant is something we can use to describe the person, right? So we got all those things, and then we've got Regulus elevating that personality or that profile, and that creates a tyrant. And so we've got the hate and the division, which is something that he pretty much ran on, which is something he's pretty much created the entire time that he's been in office, that he's been in the public eye. Remember, what brought him into the public eye was the entire Obama birthright issue, right? So it was contention. He brought contention into the body politic even before he became president. The first thing he did when he came down the elevator was he created division. He spurred division, right? What did he say? These immigrants are rapists and blah blah blah, and maybe some of them are okay people. Right. So the first thing that he did was instead of coming down and making any kind of I'm the president, the statement of I'm the president of everybody, any kinds of statements of unity, there have never been any statements of unity. As a matter of fact, maybe there are only statements of unity when he gets caught for something, kind of like the rest of MAGA, when they experience any kind of consequences. And if once again, if there's any MAGA here, fuck off, get out of here. I don't want you I don't want you anywhere near me. So fuck off. And if this your fucking shit demon king, get the fuck out of here. Anyway, continuing on. So the division and hate that's been spurred, and not just hate, but spurred forward. That's been not just sustained, but what's the word I'm looking for? Expanded on. Once again, elevated. Right. This fixed star has the ability to elevate this Mars, and of course, this is what's on this person's mind. Note also that the sun, who's the ruler of the ascendant, which also represents the mind or represents the person in the head, that represents the person. Its next application is to Mars with reception. So this is one of those receptions where planet A is applying to planet B, who's in the sign of planet A. Okay, so that's a reception where Sun receives Mars. Usually you have planet A in the sign of planet B, and that would mean planet B would receive planet A. In this case, planet A receives planet B. Okay, so already then that puts that not just reinforces the arrogance of the Leo, but it also gives a more violent turn to this solar personality. And note, of course, this motherfucker can't shut up. It's the Mercury is in, I mean the sun is in Gemini. And so the sun's in Gemini. And note also that the moon who rules the Mercury is opposing the sun. So anytime Mercury rules the tongue. And so Mercury's in Cancer, which means that the Mercury is always giving this opposition. And one of the things we'd seen is you usually often see is either uh, full moons or Mercury moon oppositions can often give the person the inability to shut the fuck up. And this motherfucker certainly can't. Um, Mars is a really important planet in this chart, not just because he's on the ascendant and because he is. Oh, wait, what's the next thing? Oh, holy war. Well, we just talked about that, right? This person has inadvertently brought us in to a holy war. Brought us into a holy war. And so, because we just saw what she said, this is a completely different thing. They have now, as a matter of fact, I think she said later in that video that Iran has basically declared a jihad. a worldwide jihad. I mean, we may be experiencing all kinds of terrorist attacks in this country. Like he's made the country less stable. Remember destabilization? Remember that was just some one of the things I was just talking about. He's made the country less stable. He has what has he done? He's gotten rid of any kind of alliances. This is Venus or Saturn as the ruler of Libra. Look also how the rule. Now this is what's so interesting because this is such a fascinating personality because this is someone who's been elevated to so much power, but they're a complete nincompoop. They're completely incompetent. One of the stupidest people in the universe and fuck up all the time. Fuck up all the time. Matter of fact, everything they've done, they've pretty much failed at, right? Fuck up. I mean, talk about failing upwards. This is the ultimate fail son, the ultimate fail son failing upwards to the doom of everybody else. And so notice the Martian impulse. The Martian impulse is to divide and to contend against. The first thing he did when he took office in 24 is create tariffs and fuck up our alliances. Then we have the different of the trying to what is it? The encroachment on Greenland, the encroachment on Venezuela, right? So all of this different stuff, all of this kind of warmongering and what is it? Usurpation. Mars. It's all Mars. The entire thing, the entire modus operandus of Donald Trump is to divide, to hurt, to oh, so that's the other part of it. This is a sadist. This is the chart of a sadist, obviously. This person revels in the destruction of others. And let's talk about that. The destruction of others. Note here that the part of fortune is on the cusp of the seventh house representing others. Note then also that Mars opposes the part of fortune. The part of fortune. So this person can be is well, that's going to be something that kind of goes with we know that when we talk about the part of fortune, that's something that kind of goes with how they appear in their not specifically public life, but their work life. Their path to fortune is going to include this Saturn. I mean Mars, right? I was thinking my own because in my case Saturn opposes my part of fortune, right? So it's going to involve this Mars. Right, whenever he gets on his path to do whatever, Mars is going to show up as one of the primary things because of its opposition. Of course, we've got this whole other thing with the Saturn Venus that we were talking about. But one of the things that I was thinking about, note that the other people are not in good shape in this chart. If if the seventh house is other people, the ruler of other people is detrimented and in the 12th. Now, we also, of course, use the part of fortune as an ascendant, and we know that it's used as a significator for substance, right? But that means then that also, remember, even though he comes from a wealthy family, whatever, he was the one who fucked up the casino, right? He was the one that bankrupted the casino. And people always say, how do you fucking bankrupt a casino? Right? So we've got, and also remember that this Mars is inimical to this Saturn. And not only that, note, Saturn is in the fall of Mars, and Mars is in the detriment of Saturn. So even though they're not having any kind of aspect, I mean, unless you want to do with the semi-sextile or some bullshit, but even though there's no aspect between them, there's a relationship by sign. That means that when the person embarks on their path to fortune, right, which I call the part of fortune, that Mars is involved, but that the Mars is actually neither of them can really work. The Saturn isn't really working that well, and the Mars, when it does work, is working quite well, and when it does work, it works to the detriment of Saturn. So I think that this has been really this has really been uh, stumping me, around why is it that he's such a fuck up? Why is it that he's such a fuck up? And I think that I mean, I never had thought about it because because look at this, the Lord of Spirit. If you know, I talk about a lot of spirit relatively quite a bit. And look, this Jupiter, we talked about the billionaire thing and Jupiter and Saturn being in mutual reception by exaltation. The Venus is in the exaltation of Jupiter. The Jupiter is in the domicile of Venus, right? So we can see how there's all this good shit that comes to this person, but it looks like the person themselves can't kind of get it together. So what did we look at? So we were talking about how important that Mars is. And Mars is important not just because he's on the ascendant and because he's on Regulus and because he's got three points of dignity. He, is the ruler of the term and face, which makes him stronger than almost everybody in the chart, stronger than almost everybody in the chart by essential dignity, then stronger than everybody else in the chart by accidental dignity. Remember, accidental dignity is where the planet is. But then he's stronger than everybody else in the chart based on this. So in medieval astrology, we work with this thing called the Lord of the Genitor. Now, not a lot of people use it because I don't think a lot of people know how to use it. And believe it or not, it was originally used for horary. And it's only as a result of my medieval astrology horary class and kind of starting that and all of the research that I would do for it that I realized that I learned this and started using it and started being able to use it in natal, because actually the Lord of the Genitor was used in what are called consultation charts to understand why the person is coming to ask the question. So it's the search of the heart. It's search of the heart of the native for why they actually are asking the question in the first place. But in we just did a video on this in the technique spotlight, and what it looked like it was showing up for me is that it was like a beacon, a beacon for the person. Like the person has this beacon that is always kind of shining in their life, and it's kind of becomes a signature of sorts. And one of the best examples of this was Jared Leto and his Mars, who was the Lord of the Genitor. And Jared Leto is an actor and also a musician, the frontman of a band called 30 Seconds to Mars. And it's a platinum band, and he now is a fucking cult leader, and he's got his group is called an echelon, which is a martial term, a military term, and he's got places called Camp Mars and Mars Island, and so we can see how it becomes kind of like this neon sign for the person, and we see the way in which he's been using it. And so let's talk a little bit about how to find the Lord of the Genitor, what we use to find it, why this word beacon makes a lot of sense. So the Lord of the Genitor is really part and parcel with finding the longevity of the person or the life expectancy of the person. It's usually used in tandem with finding the high leg, what's called the high leg, which is kind of the symbol of life in the chart, the symbol of life in the chart, and this thing called the Karukuda or Alkakadan, which basically gives you the amount of years that the person would live. And I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff right at the moment. I'm just going to talk about how to find the Lord of the Genitor. And this high leg is important because basically high leg is a representation of light equaling life. Remember that the sun is the natural significator for life and for vitality. The ascendant is called the house of life. The ascendant is east, is due east, which is where the sun rises every day. That's why we call it the rising sign, right? Because at the moment of your birth, a zodiac sign goes over the horizon and becomes visible, and that is your rising sign. It's a sign rises. So the ascendant naturally is one of these places. So is the sun, who is, of course, the daytime light, and so is the moon, who is the nighttime light. Then the ascendant, which we just talked about, then the part of fortune, which is the distance between the two lights projected from the ascendant. And then the last is the new moon or the previous new moon or full moon. Everything, all five of these points are called hylegical places. These are the hylegical places. And so ultimately, finding the Lord of the Genitor is finding the super sun or the supernova sun in the chart. And so the light equals life. This is the chart that is a beacon or a guide, a beacon or star of light. Or like I say, or a supernova of light, a super sun. So, as I mentioned, every degree has potentially five planets who have diminishing rulership over them. For instance, at the 23rd degree of Gemini, where the sun is, Mercury has five, Saturn has two, or three rather, Mars has two, and the sun has one. Oops, sorry. Right? Mars has one. So, or sun has one. Mars has two, sun has one. So this obviously Mercury as the domicile ruler wins, right? Because he has 5 points, 3, 4, 2, 3, 2, 1, right? So he's the winner. However, we can do that for all five of these degrees by adding all of these up. So for instance, here for Mercury, Mercury has 5 and 10. There it is. Planet totals are 10, etc. So Saturn has 19, Mars has 7, Sun has 10, Jupiter has 9. Now, note that Mars has the least amount of points here as far as the planet totals are concerned. Now, that's significant, relatively significant, but it's not the whole picture because we're also looking to see how many points the planet gets based on where it is by house. So if we go back to the chart, the first house has 12 points, 10th is 11, 11 is 10, 5 is 9, 7 is 8, 4 is 7, 9 is 6, 3 is 5, 2 is 4, 8 is 3, 12 is 2, 6 is 1. Note that pattern, right? 12, 11, 10. Then we go to the opposition, 9. Then we finish the angles, 8, 7. Then we start at the ninth house, first opposition, 6, 5. Then we start at the second house, second opposition, 2, 4, 2, 8, right? Or rather, 4, 3. Then we go start at the 12th house, 2, 1. All right. So that's how the that works out. The points work. Okay. So Mercury gets 10 points because he's in the 11th. Saturn gets 2 points because he's in the 12th. Mars gets 12 points, right? He had the least amount of points as far as the totals for planet for essential dignity, but he's got the most because of where he is. So he's 12 points. Sun is in the 11th, at the cusp of the 11th, so 10, and then Jupiter's in the second house getting 4. So when we add all of those, now note here we have day and hour. So the day ruler gets 7 points. The day ruler isn't here. I think it was the moon. And then the hour ruler gets 6 points. So we add all of that stuff together, giving us 20 points for Mercury, 21 points for Mars, 19 points for 19 points, 20 points for Sun, 13 or 19 points for Jupiter. Now, here's the thing. Just because a planet wins all the points doesn't mean that it is the one that we're going to use, right? So who did we say who did we say was the actual winner? The actual winner of the points is Saturn, right? But here's the thing. You can't use a planet who's in detriment. So what Herman of Camarena says, or Corinthia, yeah, Herman of Corinthia says is you want to look at the planet who's the richest in dignities, next who is strongest, who's the most well situated by strength, and in the thing on the Lord of the Genitor, I talk about all of this and I go into detail. And then third, who's the best aspected, who by regard is receiving the best regard. So we can't use Saturn even though he's the winner. The sun's not bad. He's in his own fall. He's in his own face, and he's applying to his ruler, so he's received, right? So, or rather, there is reception. So that's a possibility, and he's in the 11th. But Mars is the strongest planet with 3 points over all of these others. 3 points in essential dignity. He's on Regulus and he is on the ascendant. This is the planet that is the Lord of the Genitor. So not only then is this planet kind of on the ascendant, it's not the ruler of the part of fortune or the spirit. Not only is it on the ascendant, it's also the Lord of the Genitor. It's Lord of the five high legical places. And excuse me, is kind of the guiding light, the beacon of this chart's beacon. And we can see it. So this is a way maybe to be looking at this, not way to maybe, but this is a way to be looking at this Lord of the Genitor. And it's a way to be understanding this person's modus operandus. All right. So that's my little presentation on Trump and Mars and everything else.